I hate introductions, don't you? But it seems like they're always necessary. So here goes. I'm Ashley. I'm a wife, mom, pastor, and missionary's kid, which is double trouble if you didn't know. And if you're in this space, we're here to learn about who God is, who we are in Him, and how to do faith in the real, meaning the real messy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 9. This episode terrifies me because this episode is something that's kind of raw for me, and I'm making a commitment to keep this a one-shot episode. That's usually my rule of thumb because I want you to feel like you're sitting here and we're having a conversation and you see the imperfections, but there have been some exceptions made in previous episodes, mostly because of sound issues as I'm learning. But today I am talking about the things that God uses to keep us dependent and keep us humble. And those things are usually hard. And for me, one of the things I should say, is that we have a son with a learning difference, or what is most commonly referred to as a learning disability. You're going to hear me say learning difference because I really dislike the term disability. When I think about a disability, I guess to me, it just has such a negative connotation. Whereas when I talk about a difference, it takes my mind back to the heart of the Creator, that He did not make us all the same. And He gave us different strengths and different weaknesses that He uses. And to me, it's a much more positive way to look at it. And it focuses me back on what is true, and it takes me to God's character. So that is why you will hear me say learning difference instead of learning disability. To give you a little history, and you're going to hear me be a little hesitant here. This is difficult for me to navigate as I share with you because this is not just my story. This is also our son's story. And he is not necessarily comfortable with me sharing everything. And so I am trying to honor his wishes and respect his privacy and share only the things that he's comfortable with you knowing, because he's still young and he's still growing and he's still very much working through this. So if you hear hesitancy, it is just that I wish to respect my son and his story. But I want to share my part in the story with you, especially for those of you that might be able to relate, or perhaps you're at a point where you're wondering if you have a child with a learning difference. I want to talk through these things with you. The history is that in first grade, or no, I take that back, in kindergarten was a great year. And then first grade came, and first grade was a year of transition as we moved from Illinois to Michigan. And so I was seeing some difficulties with him when it came to education, but I thought it was the transition and me. I did not go to school to become a teacher. I had zero desire to become a teacher. I have a podcast about that, homeschooling. You can go check it out if you haven't heard it. But I was very insecure in this journey of homeschooling. And so I thought, it must be me if he's struggling. In second grade, I started reaching out to more people, more friends with education backgrounds, and the response that we kept hearing most consistently was, a lot of this is normal for the age, so keep an eye on it, but it's probably just something he'll grow out of. All right. By third grade, first semester, we were becoming increasingly concerned. I knew that either I had completely messed up our son and his education, or there was something bigger going on here. Oh, okay. I'm not going to say I'm sorry if I get emotional. This is something I'm working on. I find so often that I apologize when I get emotional, and it's okay to show emotion. But I don't want to just blubber through this whole thing. I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I'll never forget how in third grade, simple things like reciting the alphabet, knowing the days of the week and the months of the year, and being able to recite them seemed to be beyond his grasp. And again, I kept going back to it's got to be me. I've just messed him up. The problem with that was the fear and the pride getting in the way of who do I ask for help? Because I probably had no business doing this. And the shame that I was carrying for what I was seeing. I wish I could say, looking back on that year, that I was a patient, kind, wonderful mother and teacher to him. But when I look back, I mostly remember the frustration that I felt. I wasn't sure if it was me, if it was laziness on his part, or if there was truly something going on. And I remember by the time we reached December, I was very much in a place of desperation. Eric would come home from work to either me crying, our son crying, or both of us crying. And I remember one early December day going up into our closet, and I was weeping and praying. And I said, God, I need answers, but I don't know the questions to ask to know how to find the answers. I don't know who to ask for help, but we need something. Something's got to give here. We can't keep doing this. The amazing thing was that about a week later, I received a call from a dear friend in Florida, Lindsay, whose son was facing some learning challenges and they were receiving help from a tutor. And she said, my tutor has a connection and a colleague in Michigan. Let me see if I can hook you guys up. And so this professional in Michigan called me one day on her way up to Christmas break up north. And she said, yes, I'm in Michigan. Do you happen to live near this town? And I said, we live in that town. And so she agreed to come to our home after Christmas break and she assessed our son. And based on that assessment, she was able to confirm that, yes, there were some learning differences going on. And she encouraged us to go have him formally diagnosed with a psychologist. So we did that. Now, not every family makes that choice, and that's okay. For our family, the reason that we chose to do that was because our son had a lot of questions. He was very much aware that he was different and that things that were easy for other kids were not easy for him. And in a homeschool setting, when you have an older child who's able to witness a younger sibling excelling in things that are really hard for you, that's hard to ignore. And so we agreed that being able to give him answers would be helpful. He is a very logical kind of boy. He is black and white. And so we knew to have a doctor involved, to have a professional involved, to be able to give answers would be beneficial for him. We have since had other tutors involved. We've had other professionals, pediatricians, lots of involvement. And the consistent response we receive back is, wow, we've never seen a case quite like this. Wow, this case is very severe. I have a good friend in education who was able to help me understand words like severe in that context. But as a mom, to hear words like that is really hard. I remember the first time we got the report back from the psychologist. It was over 10 pages long, and it was chart after chart, statistics, percentages, and all of these numbers comparing him to where other children his age typically are. And all of his numbers were in the negatives. As a mom looking at that and reading that, I remember just feeling this sense of hopelessness. How in the world Are we going to get him the help he needs? How in the world is he going to get to where he needs to be able to thrive? I received that report on a Wednesday night right before I was supposed to leave for church to a commitment we had there. I had a good cry, loaded up the kids, and a friend of mine saw me and she could see that I was not okay. She pulled me aside and she asked what was wrong, and I was in the middle of telling her, and it dawned on me, I'm telling this story to a parent whose child is losing their hearing. And I remember feeling such a sense of shame that I was complaining. This friend, when I told her I was sorry for complaining when she was going through so much with her own child, said, "It's okay. This is your hard, and hard is hard." Her grace to me in that response is something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget, and something I hope I can pass on to other parents and people who are struggling. You don't have to necessarily understand fully what someone's going through to extend compassion to them. I don't want to make this podcast all about dyslexia. There is a lot of information out there, but I will say it is difficult because there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. There are even some professionals who will say it's not a thing. There are some that will say it's a cop-out. There are some that will say it's an excuse for laziness, for different things like that. That's all out there. And that makes it very difficult to talk about. See, unlike a physical disability that you can see, or even some I can't say that word today, even some disabilities like autism that are easier maybe for us to recognize at this point in time, just in general as public. Something like dyslexia is hard because it is a silent difference. Don't look at him and say, oh, there's something different there. And it's easy for people to draw wrong assumptions or conclusions about our son or about our family based on what they don't understand because they can't see it. And it's funny because one of the things that's difficult in this journey is I have had to learn how to advocate for our son. And I have to learn how to teach him to advocate for himself. But it's hard to advocate for him when there's so much that people don't know. There's a lack of education out there. And it's hard for our son to advocate for himself because he carries a lot of embarrassment that his difference can bring. Do you realize how much reading is out there in the everyday? It is everywhere. Just seriously, take a day and make a mental note of every time you read something, a sign, a label. I think it will surprise you. I've become so much more aware of that because I'm looking at it through a lens of, can our son function in this world? But it's not just about reading. Dyslexia can affect memory. It can affect processing skills. It can affect so many different areas, and it affects all of those for him. And when we are continually in environments where he is required to read, often in front of peers, that can become debilitating and cause a lot of fear and anxiousness. I'm so thankful, though, for those that have been willing to listen and try to understand where we're coming from. Something that I've told other people that work with him is we are not asking that exceptions be made for our son. God has given him a good brain. He's really intelligent and he is capable of rising to the occasion. He just needs some accommodations made so that he can learn best and so that he can thrive in that environment. And when people understand and hear that, they're usually very responsive and very gracious about that. And so that has been a good thing. And that is something that we're trying to teach him as he's advocating for himself, just saying, hey, I learn differently. God created my brain a little bit differently than yours. And so if I could have this or if I could do that, that would really help me. And yeah, that's hard. I mean, he's 12. So being around peers and having to say something like reading is difficult, that's tough. But we've we've really tried to always take this back to the creator. Do you remember in the old claymation Rudolph, the Red-Nosed Reindeer movie? There's the island of misfit toys. Sometimes it's like that. It's that feeling of not quite fitting in and not knowing what to do with that, which is something I've discussed in an earlier episode as well. But what we want him to understand is we're not here to fit in. We're not here to be everybody else. God is here for you to be you. And He has a specific plan and purpose for you that's going to look different than your brother's. And He has wired you perfectly. I love how the Psalms point out that we are wonderfully and perfectly made. I often have to remind myself when I'm having moments of panic, when I'm looking at all the stuff that lies ahead and I'm watching him climb his Mount Everest and wondering how he's going to get there. I'm often reminded that God has equipped him with everything he needs for God to use him if he's willing to be obedient. God does not need him to be an excellent reader for him to be used. It's kind of like math for me. Math and my brain are like oil and water. I try, I really do, but my brain is not wired to thrive mathematically. And that's okay because thank the Lord, He didn't call me to do something where I need to thrive mathematically. I'm more of a word person. And voila, God has me here using words. God wants our hearts, He wants our obedience, and He wants our trust. And that's been probably my biggest prayer for our son is that when the enemy comes to him with that whisper of, did God really say? Is God really good? That he will choose to go back to what is true, that he will find comfort and security in being able to say, my God is all powerful. My God never makes mistakes. I am not a mistake. And yes, I have strengths, but I also have weaknesses. But my God says that when I am weak, He is strong. And that for all of us is true. You may not have a learning disability. You may not know anybody that does. I doubt that. You probably do. And if you don't think you do, it's probably just don't know it. They do a good job hiding that. But I want to point out that those things that we struggle with, the things that keep us dependent, the things that humble us with the realization that I am not God, are blessings, even when they're hard to swallow. Because to be brought to a place where we are hungry for God, where we are thirsty for Him, where we are reaching for Him, where we long to be in intimate relationship with Him, those are good things because He is good. You often hear the phrase, God uses all things for good, and that can sound really churchy, but it's really true. That doesn't mean it's always easy. When we see our son experiencing Fear, because he's going to be in an environment with peers where, as he says, someone might find out that he struggles. We have to remind him of what is true and remind him of the goodness of God and that God will use even this for good, not just in his life, but in the lives of others. Because when we have struggles, when we have those things that God uses to humble us and to keep us dependent, he's also creating in us a gift of being able to comfort and help others. How awesome is that? I mean, what kind of purpose? Look at that purpose that he gives us to say, our son can have more empathy for somebody that works their tail end off, but still struggles with something that's easy for everybody else or most people more than I can. Our son is probably going to be a lot more compassionate to the struggling than I have been because he's going to have an understanding that I can't have because it wasn't mine to have. God gave that to him. And so that gives us hope and that gives us purpose. As always, if you have questions, if there's something that I said that you want to talk more about, you are always welcome to reach out to me. There have been a few times on my personal social media pages where I've shared some of the story, and I have always been so encouraged, and so has our son, when we've had people privately reach out and say, hey, I have some questions because I think my kid might be struggling, or hey, where did you go to find these answers? And that has always proved to be a blessing. So please don't hesitate. I will always respect your privacy. And if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to help you look for it because I know what it is to be in a place where you are desperate for answers. But I want to leave you with this reminder that God sees you and God hears you. So wherever you are in your journey, reach out to him. Pray with expectancy that he's going to answer, not necessarily in the way you want, but in the way that you need and in the time that is right. He is so good in that way. When we're willing to admit we need him, that's when we start making our stories about him. And I'm really grateful that this life is all about a God that loves us so much. Thanks for being here today, and I'll talk to you next time.